Hi, I'm Lhadon.
I'm Tendor, and this is Our Nation.
News and analysis on the state of Tibet. Welcome back to our second episode, and thank you for tuning in again if you saw it yesterday. And for anybody new to this, we're also new to this, so bear with us. We'll go straight to Tibet. News out of Tibet today. 9 monks sentenced in Loca, 1 commits suicide. The story is that the Loca Intermediate People's Court sentenced 9 Tibetan monks to various prison terms ranging between 2 and 15 years for their participation in protests last March. It looks like, according to the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, the monks participated in a protest March 15th at the Samye Government Administrative Headquarters in Tanang County.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Tanang County in Loca Prefecture.
Which is in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. It says they were later detained and held at the Loca PSB, Public Security Bureau Detention Center. And then seems like they were sentenced sometime around May or June of 2008. Not long after their protest, though, in March, work teams, that's what they describe these Chinese government political re-education and sort of indoctrination teams. Work teams came to the monastery to interrogate the monks around March 19th. And at that time, a visiting teacher from Dorjidak Monastery from Nyemo County, he actually left a note and killed himself. And the note he left was him attempting to take responsibility for the protests, trying to take, of course, the heat off the rest of the monks. We hear this story quite often from Tibet in the past and certainly in the last year. And so in the end, the monks were, 4 out of the 9 monks were visiting teachers from other monasteries. Tenzin Puchung, sentenced to 15 years, Tenzin Zopa, 13 years, Gelek, 2 years sentence, Ngawang Tenzing, 2 years sentence. And then the 5 monks from Samye, the monastery themselves, Geltsin, who was sentenced to 15 years, Nimatashi and Punzo sentenced to 13 years, Tenzin Dawa and Rigden sentenced to 2 years.
And these are people that we have learned who have been imprisoned. There's no telling how many other people there are whose names never come out in the media somehow. And one thing about Loca that we want to share with you is that Loca is the place where the Tibetan resistance was based out of at one point, the Tibetan armed resistance when the Chinese invaders first were entering Tibet. Many of you know that the Tibetans put up a very brave fight against the troops. And as they were being chased from eastern Tibet into central Tibet and then to western Tibet, Loca is the place where the Tibetans really held out for quite some time, for a few years, even after the first invaders entered Tibet in 1949. So this place has a huge history of resistance, and once again we see that even today, in the most non-violent way, Tibetans are still resisting Chinese occupation.
Yeah, this is actually where Gompo Tashi, who was the commander of the Tibetan resistance force Chushigangduk, or 4 rivers, 6 ranges. Mm-hmm. This is where he set up sort of the resistance headquarters around 58-59, which was, of course, which is the, 59 was the Tibetan Uprising we spoke about yesterday. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of that uprising, which led to the Dalai Lama and tens of thousands of Tibetans escaping into exile in India. And so it's just interesting that this, we come all the way back to this place, to modern resistance and still courageous and incredible acts of defiance. And we will be working, with this information and campaigning for the release of these monks. I think that the information is a little sketchy, and in a way it's sort of old news if you think that they were sentenced back in May last year. But for us, this is the reality of China's occupation of Tibet. They control information so carefully, and it's so dangerous for Tibetans to send information outside of Tibet. You could end up like a woman recently in eastern Tibet sentenced to 5 years just for talking on her cell phone and telling people outside of Tibet what was happening inside Tibet. So, you know, we do the best we can in the Tibet movement, and quite often it's difficult for us to give good, up-to-date, accurate information to the world's media, to international governments, because we simply don't have access to, you know, that information, because the Chinese government keeps Tibet so strictly and tightly controlled.
And speaking of information censorship, many of you by now know that yesterday the China Central Television Network, you know, CCTV, the way it's known, one of those CCTV buildings went up in flames. It caught fire because of some of the New Year firecrackers that were going around it. And while we all know about it, the Chinese government has tried to keep that information censored from the Chinese people themselves. And they have removed the photos from many of the websites, tried to erase many of those, you know, news articles, news stories that went with it. So this is the kind of, you know, censorship they do, and one of the reasons why they're doing this with this incident, although it was one of the, you know, like very, very, if you've seen the photos, very dramatic kind of, you know, fire just consuming that building from bottom to top. That's the, you know, that's the propaganda machine of the Chinese government, CCTV. That's the engine that feeds endless propaganda to the Chinese media, to the international media, to all the, you know, people living in China, basically. And it's like feeding people lies all the time. And at the same time, in spite of the censorship, there are many savvy Chinese who have, you know, got photos of the fire, who have written about it, who have blogged about it. And one of the bloggers I was reading this morning was saying that it's very ironic that the CCTV managed to make the biggest news story of the year and somehow failed to cover it, you know?
Yeah, it's exactly CCTV that really, after, when the March uprising started last year, March 14th is when, you know, the real sort of trouble started in Lhasa, and CCTV so quickly, of course at the command of the Chinese government, manipulated all of the images that the Chinese would see and the world would see from Tibet, and just showed one image over, you know, one picture of the uprising over and over again, which is one of violence and Tibetans attacking Chinese and burning stores. And, you know, there was hundreds of protests across Tibet last year, and overwhelmingly those protests were peaceful. There were some incidents of property destruction, and even fewer incidents, just a handful of violence against individuals, and Chinese, you know, Tibetan on Chinese violence. And they didn't, you know, they just showed it as one violent riot. The government, CCTV, spun it this way. And in a way, the world's media kind of ate it up, bought this story, and rebroadcast it to the world. So in terms of CCTV, the influence that they have in China, really, it's very dangerous what that kind of propaganda can do. At the same time, Chinese people are smart. Chinese citizens are savvy, and they can see through these kind of lies too. And in this case, as the Chinese government tries to control them through withholding information, maybe they end up doing more damage to themselves. And I think it just speaks volumes about how scared they are, the Chinese government, how insecure the leadership is.
Yeah, in a way, the Chinese people, how aware they are of what their government is trying to do, also seems obvious in the tone of many of those blog posts and what people are writing in their messages about this incident. Although it's, you know, this building belongs to the Chinese government, although it's Chinese people are writing about this incident, their tone is mostly very celebratory. You know, people sort of saying, okay, you've been telling us lies all this time, and this is what you get, kind of. That's the tone that we've seen in those articles.
I think we'll end it there because we're trying to keep this short and we're running out of time. So thank you again for joining us. Sorry that we can't talk more about this. We can talk more tomorrow. We'll be back again. This is Our Nation News and Analysis on the State of Tibet, and please do write to us and let us know ideas for our upcoming shows.